It's time for another episode of Gospel Preaching Live, brought to you by the Kearney Church of Christ, which meets at 406 North Clark in Kearney, Missouri. Make plans to come out and visit the brethren, who look forward to seeing you. And now the host of Gospel Preaching Live, Richard Dodson.
Welcome to Gospel Preaching Live. My name is Richard Dodson, and I work as the preacher at the Kearney, Missouri Church of Christ. If you're listening on KPGZ radio, you're listening at 8 o'clock Sunday morning. What an excellent opportunity you have to listen to a gospel message now and then be able to come to the services at the Kearney Church of Christ, which starts with Bible study at 9:30, 10:30 for a worship service. And we are located at 406 North Clark. I would sure love to see you. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the lesson. I want to talk to you about a passage that has dealt me fits at times. And I want to talk to you about characteristics of God that is mentioned in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. And so I want to read from Romans 1 and verse 20. Paul said, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Now, who are they that are without excuse? He's talking about those people who have denied him, denied his right as God, as the creator, to be able to rule, and have taken to themselves to determine their own means of rules of living, their own means of rules of service, and even to the point of whom they're going to serve. Many times that's themselves. And so right here, God is saying that since creation, there has been enough evidence. His invisible attributes are clearly seen. So there's enough evidence that we can look at nature itself and we can see that evidence of his eternal power and Godhead. And the evidence is so overwhelming that these people who live like this are without excuse. And I'm talking about those people who do not regard God, who do not have a regard for Jesus Christ in their life. So I want to look at Romans 1 and verse 20 by way of introduction and look at a few verses, and let's see what we can find out about this eternal power and Godhead. Now, again, he's talking about God himself, and then we're going to look at the evidences, but God himself, he's describing his eternal power, and that first word is eternal. In Revelations 22 and verse 13, Jesus says, "I am the Alpha and Omega." And of course, we know that's the Greek alphabet letters. That's A, Alpha, Omega is the ending. But he emphasizes the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So right there, he's talking about whom was there in the beginning and whom will be there in the end. And that, of course, is God himself, or Jesus Christ. In Psalms 90 and verse 2, another passage that goes with this, he says, "Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you have formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." From everlasting. So what man has problems with is time. We live in a world of time. We're born into a world of time. We have a birthday, and we, many times on our birth certificate, it has the time in which we're born. So yes, we are born into a world of time, but time is a created thing. I mean, we read that in the book of Genesis. Time is created. We don't know what took place before time, other than there was God. That's all we know. And so it's hard for us to imagine anything taking place before our world of time took place. But yet we know that did happen. We have that recorded in the Bible. And from what we're going to see, there's even evidence of this in nature. And we're going to take a look at that. but God himself was there, and he existed before time was actually created. In Romans 1 and verse 20, again, we go back to this passage. Now he's emphasizing his eternal power, the power of God. And so we ask ourselves, okay, God is eternal. It makes that claim. And he has this power. What kind of power? Well, in Luke 1 and verse 37, we read that with God, nothing will be impossible. Think about that. Nothing will be impossible. So anything that you can imagine, God can do. And I'm sure beyond even that, God could be able to accomplish it. So that's quite a bit of power. Psalms 147 and verse 4 is a passage I like to go to describe this, because when I look up at the stars of heaven, I think about how many there really is. And unfortunately, we don't live, at least in my part of the country, we have so many lights that a lot of times it darkens a lot of the stars. But when you look through those space telescopes like the Hubble telescope, you can see the stars are just so many and so vast. But yet the psalmist says that God counts the number of stars. He knows how many there are. And then it says he calls them all by name, meaning he's given them names. And that just, for me, that's shocking to think that not only for God he can do anything, he created everything, but that he counted the stars themselves and knows them by name. I think that's pretty amazing. And then finally, it says that his Godhead, the Godhead itself, is made apparent by these things that are seen. What kind of Godhead are we talking about? Well, in Isaiah 45, verse 22, we read, "Look to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is no other." Well, now that's an important point for man, because man has many gods. If you look at man on this earth, there's many people has a different opinion about what God is. But here the scriptures are saying there is but one God. And he's saying that I'm the one. The very one that makes reference over there in Rome that Paul refers to in Romans 1. This is the God. And forget all the rest. That's a big claim. Something that needs to be investigated. In Colossians chapter 1 and verse 15 through 17, speaking of Jesus, he says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, for by him all things were created that are in heaven and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Now that right there in that verse is shocking to me. If he truly is the one God, then yes, he would be the creator of all things, and that he would have created things that we know of being visible and are invisible. You may be thinking, what kind of things are invisible? Well, there are certain things, sound waves, for instance. Yeah, normally you don't see sound traveling, but that's one thing. And then there's different layers of our atmosphere that are invisible to our eye, at least partially invisible. So, I mean, there's certain things that he's taking credit for having created. But then he even mentions the thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. And that's talking about the governments in our world. And he's over them. That's what the one God is. And so we see this, we read about it in Romans chapter 1, and we understand then that this is the God that we really should be seeking. This is the God that we should know about, because it is very important that we look into these things. It says all things were created through him and for him. So we're talking about everything that was created being able to serve God. not the other way around. Too many people look to God to serve themselves. And in essence, they make themselves God. But that's not what this says. Colossians says all things were created through him and for him, meaning these things are supposed to serve God. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. Now, that's an important point. Because if there is one God, and we are here to serve him, then the penalty of sin must be pretty severe. Because what sin would be is rebellion against that which is created in his service to the Creator. And that's what sin is. We have violated what we were put here to do. And so we have to be very careful of that. Now, if we go back to Romans and think about that passage, about what he said about nature, you know, I have wrestled a long time with that passage, trying to figure out from nature, you know, how can I learn enough about God to be able to condemn those who do not serve him? And that's a good question. Well, after giving it a lot of thought and a lot of study, I've come to the point where I think I got a grasp of it. And I want to share that with you. Now, if you're watching on the video, what you're going to see for the rest of these lessons is you're going to see verses that are brought up. Some are in red, some are in blue, and some are in gold. And the part that's in red will represent God's design. The part that's in blue will represent God's order, and the part that's in gold will be his purpose. Why am I even bringing this up? Because this is God revealing himself in nature. And when we see that, when we look at the things created and we can see design, order, and purpose, when used consistently, we're going to see that that's a characteristic of God displayed in nature we can't ignore and that we need to look to in everything that God does. Design, order, purpose. If there is not design or order or purpose, that's not God. Because this is obviously, when we go back, this is what we see about God, and this is whom we should look to be serving in our life here on this earth. Okay, let's go ahead and let's look at the first one. Let me bring up the verse here. Genesis chapter 1. Let's just start in the very beginning. God said, let there be light. So now we have design, right? And there was light, and God saw the light, and it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. So now he's establishing order for the light. Now let's look at the purpose. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. All right, so now he's created evening and morning, and he's calling light day, and darkness he's calling night. And it's based upon light when it shines and light when it doesn't shine. Light versus darkness. In the daytime, we have light. At nighttime, we have darkness. And God created that. And from that, we see God's purpose, his design, his order, and his purpose. And that's very important when we're considering that one God. Let's go ahead and continue on and looking at creation. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens. Okay, there's more design. And what's the purpose? What's the order? To divide the day from the night. The purpose. Let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens, to give light on the earth. And it was so. But it goes on. Then God made two great lights. So now we have more design. Let's look at the order. The greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He's talking about the sun and the moon. The sun rules the day, The moon rules the night. And he made the stars also. There's more design. God set them in the firmament of the heavens, meaning up in the sky, in the space. And what did he do that for? That's another order, by the way. But the purpose was to give light on the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that was good. Okay, so here we've looked at two passages from the beginning, from creation. And we can see design, order, and purpose. That is very important when we're looking to learn about God and being able to establish who he is and what we need to do to be pleasing to him. Remember the claim, everyone's without excuse. Just by looking at his creation, man is without excuse. So just looking at, we have looked in a very limited way, we're seeing that there is a design, which means there's a designer, and that would be God. There is order, meaning he has the right to rule. He is God, and he is establishing that rule and how things are supposed to function. And then the purpose, why he's doing what he's doing. We see that taking place. We learn that about God just from looking at creation. We're not talking about just looking at the Bible to learn this, but the Bible does make that claim. But the Bible here is making reference to those things that are created, and we're able to see that there had to be a designer. There is a designer, and it's called for a designer. I mean, that's exactly what the Bible calls for. So when I look up and I see the sun, I know that didn't happen by chance. There's no way that could have just happened from a big bang. Now, why do I say that? Because in this world, we know things don't happen by chance. Everything has a reaction to something else. Something doesn't come from nothing. And so the sun didn't just happen. There wasn't some big, even if there was, let's say all the planets collided and the sun came, it resulted from it. Well, where'd the planets come from? I mean, there's always there has to be matter to create something. And that's the problem. Everything that God made that we read about in the beginning came from nothing. And there is absolutely no evidence that it came from anything other than God spoke it into existence. That's where it came from. And we understand that because that's the only way it could have happened. Because something doesn't come from nothing. And the only one who could be able to create something from being able to speak it into existence would be a God of unlimited power. And again, we can go back to Romans chapter 1 and we can see that very event taking place. So let's think about Noah, for instance, because we're going to see more of this design, order, purpose played out with Noah. And I think this is something that is really important as you go through the Bible, what you look for, design, order, and purpose, because you learn a lot about God just by looking for those three things. Now, Noah, if we go back to Genesis, if you remember, the earth became so wicked that God had decided he was going to destroy the entire world by flood. But he was going to start all over again with Noah because Noah was righteous. And so what I want us to look at is to go back and read this, notice these passages, notice the design, order, and purpose. And all I'm trying to do is establish with you, this is an attribute of God. It's a characteristic of God that's made evident in Scripture. Look at this, Genesis 6:14 through 16. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark on its side, and you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. Now, nobody can deny that's design. That is a plan that God is passing down to Noah. There's design. Noah's going to put it together. God's not speaking this one into existence. He's expecting his servant Noah to put this together, but the design came from God. Now, let's look at the order. He says, behold, verse 17, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy it from under heaven. All flesh in the breath of life, everything that is on the earth shall die. There you go. Floodwaters are coming. Everything that's on the earth shall die. This design that he has created is to provide Noah and his family a way in which they can be saved. Because if they remain on the earth, they shall die. And so Noah and his family with the animals are going to come onto the ark. The doors will be shut and their life will be preserved. Now, why? What's the purpose of it? He says this in verse 18 and 19. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you and your sons and wife and your sons' wives with you, and of every living thing of all flesh, and you shall bring two of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. That's his purpose, to preserve life, to establish his covenant with Noah. He wants to save them and these animals from the floodwaters that are going to destroy everything off the face of the earth, all life from the face of the earth. We see that. Okay. But also we see design, we see order, we see purpose. Again, something that is clearly evident that we read about in creation, something that people who ignore are guilty of without even reading anything about the Bible, because they can look up in the, just look at creation and be able to see design, order, and purpose. Design meaning there had to be a designer, meaning there had to be a creator strong enough, more powerful enough to create all these things. Very interesting. Now let's look at the Lord's church, because there are many churches out there today that claim to be the Lord's church. But as I've tried to do in the limited time that we've had together, I've hopefully can show you that from the very beginning, God does things three ways: design, order, and purpose. And if we're looking at Noah and his ark, if we're looking at his own creation, whatever the Lord does, there's design, there's order. In other words, there's rules for which it is supposed to function, and then it's supposed to accomplish a purpose. Those are the things that we see in Scripture about God, as well as in nature itself. So now let's consider the Lord's church. What about the design? Jesus made that very clear in Matthew 16 and verse 18. He told Peter, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will build my church, he says. Well, obviously, he's the builder, he's the designer, he's going to establish his church. That's important. Now let's look at the order. 1 Timothy 3:15. Paul said that he wrote these things to Timothy so that he may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Think about what he's saying here. Paul wrote these letters to Timothy so that he'll know how to behave in the house of God, in his church. So there's things, first of all, we know that his church, his kingdom's established. And then secondly, there's rules in which we have to abide by in his church. And those things that Paul wrote were so that Timothy would know how he could do so. Well, that would apply to all of the scriptures, all the things that Paul wrote. And so we learn from the scriptures how we should behave ourselves or follow the rules concerning the Lord's church. Now, what's the purpose of that? 1 Peter 2 and verse 5. He says, you also as living stones are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Now, I want to emphasize that word acceptable. We have to offer up spiritual sacrifices, which is worship, acceptable to God through whom? Jesus Christ. Where does that take place? In his kingdom. What is his kingdom? The church. Design, order, purpose. Same that we saw from the very beginning. So why are these people guilty in Romans who don't go to church or had nothing to do with God's word or just ignoring God? Because the church was established so that we might know how to worship God and to do so and be pleasing to him. If we're not doing that, then we're guilty. And how do we know we're guilty? Just look at nature. Look at the things that are created, because it's screaming at you. It's yelling at you saying design, order, and purpose. Whom do the stars obey? God. Whom do the sun obey? God. Whom does the moon obey? God. Light obeys God. Darkness obeys God. Nothing that is created disobeys God except for man. And that's why we're guilty. That's why we're guilty of sin. And that's exactly what Romans is trying to teach us. We have to learn how to be faithful to God by reading the scriptures and accepting the fact that there is but one God and that he has a son, Jesus Christ. And if we want to learn about him, we need to understand those things that Paul wrote so that we can learn more about his church and how to behave in it. All right, that's your lesson. I hope it's been beneficial to you. If you are ever in the Kearney, Missouri area, we'd love to have you come and worship with us. We are again at 406 North Clark. Bible study at 9:30 Sunday morning, worship at 10:30. You can learn all about the church by going to kearneychurch.com. Now, if you have the opportunity, as I said earlier, we appreciate you listening on KPGZ Radio, 102.7 FM on the dial. We come on the air every Sunday morning at 8 a.m., and we sure do appreciate you tuning in. But there's still more options for you to be able to take part in. For instance, this lesson and others have been broadcast in podcast format, and you can go to Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and you can download these sermons. Just look for Gospel Preaching Live, and you'll be able to be notified whenever a sermon comes on and learn a little bit more about God and his word. Another great show comes on YouTube every Thursday at 10 a.m. Me and two other preachers get together, and it's called Berean Spirits, where we study a topic each week. We invite the public to join. They can make comments by typing in their questions or comments. We try to include those on the air. It runs for about 40 minutes. It also is broadcast in podcast form. You can go back and pick up past episodes by going to Berean Spirits on YouTube. Go to kearneychurch.com, press on the Berean Spirits app, or find the podcast broadcast on those platforms that I mentioned earlier. Okay, be listening again real soon. Until the next time, remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice in it and be glad.
This has been Gospel Preaching Live. Join us each week as truth is taught, faith is examined, and beliefs are challenged. Be sure and hit the like button so you can be notified of future episodes. And to watch past episodes, go to our website, kearneychurch.com. This has been a work of the Kearney Church of Christ.